A tense board meeting moment where Jameson is being laughed at by corporate executives as he pitches his startup idea. Close up on their smirking faces and dismissive gestures, contrasted with Jameson's determined expression and the sound of his steadying breath as he silently vows revenge. I wasn't always the tech maverick who toppled empires. 5 years ago, I was just another code monkey, grinding away in a cubicle farm for megatech solutions, watching my innovations get buried under corporate red tape. Every night, I'd return to my garage apartment, a glorified storage unit with plumbing that I rented for $800 a month in the industrial district. The ceiling leaked when it rained, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear the machine shop next door starting up at 5 a.m. But it had electricity and internet, all I needed. I remember the night everything changed. 3 energy drinks deep at 2 a.m., staring at lines of code until my vision blurred. Then it hit me. The algorithm that would change everything. A way to compress data that could revolutionize cloud storage efficiency by nearly 70%. I almost fell out of my chair. My hands were shaking as I implemented the first prototype, testing it against industry benchmarks. The results were undeniable. The next day, I walked into my manager's office, practically vibrating with excitement. This could save the company millions in server costs, I explained, spreading my notes across his desk. He barely looked up from his phone. "Sounds great, Jameson. Submit it through the proper channels." The proper channels, where good ideas went to die. That night, I made the decision. I slammed my company laptop shut, grabbed my jacket, and stormed out of my apartment. I needed air. The cool night breeze did nothing to calm the fire building inside me. At the neighborhood bar, I ran into Marcus, an old college friend who'd become a successful UX designer. "You look like hell," he said, sliding me a beer. "I'm quitting tomorrow," I replied. His eyebrows shot up. "About damn time. What's the plan?" "Starting my own thing. I've got something big." 2 weeks later, Cloud Crunch was born. Just Marcus and me working out of my garage apartment, living on ramen and coffee. Our first prototype was built on salvage servers I'd bought from a tech liquidation sale. The casing was held together with duct tape, but the technology inside was revolutionary. 6 months of sleepless nights later, we landed our first client, a small accounting firm drowning in data storage costs. When they saw their monthly bill cut by 65%, they referred us to 3 more businesses. Soon, we had enough cash flow to move into a real office, a converted storage unit in the same industrial park where I lived. Not glamorous, but it was ours. The real test came during a demonstration for a mid-size healthcare provider. Halfway through, our server crashed. Complete silence filled the room as I felt sweat beading on my forehead. Instead of panicking, I dropped to the floor, yanked open the server panel, and started rewiring while explaining our technology. The CEO was impressed not by the tech, but by how I handled the crisis. "Anyone can succeed when things go right," he said afterward, signing the contract. "I want to work with people who know what to do when things go wrong." That night, Marcus and I celebrated at the same bar where Cloud Crunch was conceived. A tech blog had picked up our story, calling us the garage startup that's solving the unsolvable. For one night, it felt like we'd made it. I had no idea that the industry titans were already watching us, plotting to either acquire or destroy what we'd built. When Blue Shift Technologies, one of the big 5 tech companies, reached out about a potential partnership, I was ecstatic. Finally, validation from the industry that had overlooked me for years. Marcus warned me to be careful, but I was too blinded by the opportunity to see the trap being laid. That meeting would become both the highest point of my career and the beginning of the most painful betrayal I've ever experienced. The Blue Shift Technologies headquarters stood like a gleaming fortress of glass and steel against the skyline, Everything my tiny office wasn't. Walking through those doors felt like stepping into another world. Sleek, minimalist, perfect. The kind of perfection that costs billions to maintain. I straightened my only decent suit jacket, suddenly aware of the coffee stain I'd tried to scrub out that morning. "Mr. Jameson," the receptionist smiled with practiced warmth. "Mr. Davidson will see you now." Richard Davidson, Blue Shift's Chief Innovation Officer, the man whose TED Talks I'd studied religiously in college. His office was larger than my entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I'd grown up in. He didn't stand when I entered, just gestured to the chair across from his desk with manicured fingers. "So, you're the garage genius everyone's talking about," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Show me what you've got that's worth my time." For the next hour, I laid bare my life's work. The compression algorithm, the implementation strategy, our market approach, everything. With each slide, Davidson leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharpening. When I demonstrated the live benchmark test, showing CloudCrunch outperforming Blue Shift's current solution by 73%, I saw something flash across his face. Not admiration. Hunger. "Impressive," he said finally, closing my laptop. "We should explore this further. I'll need you to share your technical documentation with our engineers, for due diligence." Marcus's warning echoed in my head, but I silenced it. This was Blue Shift. They didn't need to steal from garage startups. I signed their NDA and sent over our entire codebase the next morning. 3 weeks of silence followed. My calls went to voicemail. Emails received automated responses. The investor meeting I'd postponed was approaching, and I had nothing to show. Then the press release dropped. Blue Shift announces revolutionary data compression technology. My hands shook as I scrolled through the article. There it was, my algorithm, my innovation, dressed up in corporate language and Blue Shift branding. They'd even used my terminology, barely changed. The demonstration video showed Davidson himself presenting benchmarks that were identical to mine. I didn't realize I was screaming until Marcus grabbed my shoulders. "Jameson, breathe!" I slammed my laptop shut and grabbed my car keys. Marcus tried to block the door. "Where are you going?" "To get what's mine." The security guards at Blue Shift recognized me from my previous visit, but this time their smiles were replaced with stern glares as I demanded to see Davidson. After 30 minutes of insisting, they finally escorted me to a small conference room where Davidson was waiting, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. "Mr. Jameson," he said calmly, "I understand you're upset, but these accusations are serious and unfounded." "Unfounded?" My voice cracked. "You stole my technology. It's identical." "Our legal team has reviewed your claims," one suit interjected, sliding a document across the table. "Our compression technology has been in development for 18 months. We have the documentation to prove it." Fabricated. All of it. I could see it in Davidson's eyes, the practiced innocence. "You won't get away with this," I hissed, hands trembling. Davidson sighed theatrically. "Security will escort you out. And Jameson, if you continue with these defamatory statements, we'll have no choice but to protect our reputation." Something snapped inside me. I lunged across the table, grabbing Davidson by his perfectly knotted tie. "You think you can just take whatever you want?" Security pulled me off him before my fist connected with his face, but the fear I saw in his eyes in that moment gave me a flicker of satisfaction. As they dragged me out, Davidson straightened his tie with shaking hands. "You're finished in this industry," he called after me. "No one crosses Blue Shift and survives." The next morning, tech blogs ran the story. CloudCrunch founder accuses Blue Shift of theft, assaults executive. The carefully crafted narrative painted me as a failed entrepreneur having a mental breakdown, making baseless accusations against an industry leader. Our remaining clients disappeared overnight. Our one investor pulled out. Marcus stopped coming to the office. I sat alone in our tiny office, surrounded by the ruins of my dream, staring at the cease and desist letter from Blue Shift's attorneys. They weren't just stealing my technology, they were erasing me from the narrative entirely. I was becoming a cautionary tale, a joke, the garage dreamer who flew too close to the sun. That night, I stood on the bridge overlooking the city, watching the lights of Blue Shift's headquarters shimmer in the distance. I could feel the weight of failure pressing down on me, crushing my chest until I could barely breathe. Everything I'd built was gone. But as the cold wind whipped around me, something hardened in my core. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new one. One where I wouldn't be so naive, so trusting. One where I'd make them regret ever underestimating me. Rock bottom has a particular smell. It's the musty scent of unwashed clothes and takeout containers piling up in the corner of a studio apartment you can barely afford. 2 months after my confrontation with Davidson, I was surviving on freelance coding gigs and what remained of my savings. The CloudCrunch website was still online, but it was a ghost town, a digital tombstone for my ambitions. One night, after a particularly brutal coding marathon to meet a freelance deadline, I collapsed on my worn-out couch. The laptop screen glowed in the darkness, illuminating the empty whiskey glass beside it. Blue Shift's stock had jumped another 15% that day, primarily on the strength of their revolutionary compression technology. My technology. I was scrolling mindlessly through tech forums when I saw it. A thread complaining about Blue Shift's new cloud storage solution. Anyone else experiencing cascading corruption with files over 2 gigabytes? The comments section was flooded with similar reports. My heart began racing. I knew exactly what was happening. They had implemented my algorithm, but they didn't understand its soul. The mathematical elegance that made it work wasn't something you could reverse engineer without understanding the underlying theory. Their version had a fatal flaw, one that would only manifest with certain file types at scale. A flaw I had solved months ago in my garage. I shot up from the couch, suddenly sober with realization. This was it. My way back in. Not just back, but ahead. I grabbed a notebook and started sketching frantically, building on my original design. If their implementation was failing at 2 gigabytes, I could create a version that would handle terabytes seamlessly. By sunrise, I had the theoretical foundation for CloudCrunch 2.0. Not just a compression algorithm anymore, but a complete data ecosystem that would make Blue Shift's solution look like a child's science project. What I didn't have was money or a team. My phone had exactly 2 contacts who might still take my call. Marcus and Dr. Lin, my former advanced algorithms professor, who had always believed in me. I called Marcus first. "Jesus, Jameson, you sound terrible," he said, concern evident even through the phone. "I need you to meet me. I found their weakness." 3 hours later, Marcus sat across from me at a 24-hour diner, eyes wide as I explained my discovery and vision. His skepticism gradually gave way to excitement. "Even if you're right," he said, "we need capital. No investor will touch us after what happened. That's why we're meeting Dr. Lin here in 20 minutes. Dr. Eleanor Lin wasn't just my former professor. She was a legend in computational theory who had left academia to start a venture capital fund focused on disruptive technologies. When she walked into the diner, I hardly recognized her. The academic I remembered had transformed into a sharp-dressed business titan. "You look like hell, Jameson," were her first words, reminiscent of what Marcus had said to me at the bar all those months ago. "I've been there," I replied, "but I found something on my way back." For the next hour, I laid out my discovery and new vision. Dr. Lin interrupted frequently with piercing questions that cut to the heart of every weakness. When I finished, she sat back, studying me with calculating eyes. You know what happens if you fail again? You're not just finished in tech. You'll be radioactive in every industry. I won't fail. Blue Shift will come after you with everything they have. Let them. She smiled then, the first time I'd ever seen her do so, and pulled out her checkbook. $500,000, enough to rent a real office, hire a small team, and develop a prototype. You prove the concept works, and there's another $2 million waiting. I stared at the check, hands trembling. Why? I managed to ask. Because Richard Davidson stole my research 20 years ago, and I've been waiting for someone crazy enough to take him down. She stood to leave, then paused. Don't make me regret this, Jameson. The next 6 months were a blur of 18-hour days. We found a warehouse space and converted it into an office. I personally recruited every team member, brilliant misfits who had been overlooked or burned by the corporate tech world. Our prototype exceeded even my expectations, handling data volumes that would make Blue Shift's servers melt down. The night before our beta launch, I couldn't sleep. I drove to the waterfront where I'd once contemplated giving up everything. The Blue Shift building still dominated the skyline, but it no longer intimidated me. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number with an address and time. If you want the truth, come alone. Common sense said it was a trap, but I had nothing left to lose. The address led to an underground parking garage. I gripped the metal pipe I'd brought for protection, every sense on high alert. Footsteps echoed behind a concrete pillar, and I spun around, ready to swing. I wouldn't, said a familiar voice. A woman stepped into the dim light. Sarah Chen, Blue Shift's former lead engineer, who had mysteriously resigned 2 months earlier. Why am I here? I demanded, still holding the pipe. Because I helped them steal your work, she said flatly. And because I have proof. She handed me a flash drive. Internal emails, documentation timestamps, the original files they took from you. Davidson didn't just steal your algorithm, he's built his entire reputation on stolen innovations. Mine included. I lowered the pipe slowly. Why help me now? Because what they're doing isn't innovation. It's theft. And because their implementation is fundamentally flawed, it's going to fail catastrophically, and they're hiding it from their clients. As she turned to leave, I called after her. They'll know it was you. She looked back, eyes hard with determination. Some things are worth the cost. I returned to our office, where Marcus was still working. When I plugged in the flash drive, everything changed. We now had the ammunition we needed, not just to launch our superior product, but to reclaim what was stolen. As the evidence spread across my screen, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Not just hope, but certainty. Send out the press invitations, I told Marcus. We're moving the launch up to tomorrow, and make sure Blue Shift gets a front row seat. The day of our launch arrived with perfect dramatic timing. Blue Shift was experiencing its first major public relations crisis. Their compression system had suffered a catastrophic failure, corrupting terabytes of customer data for a major banking client. Their stock had dropped 8% overnight, and tech forums were ablaze with speculation. Davidson had issued a hasty statement about unforeseen scaling issues and promised a fix within weeks. He had no idea what was coming. Our launch event was held in a converted industrial space, raw concrete and exposed steel beams that reflected our scrappy roots. Every major tech journalist and industry influencer was there, drawn by the mysterious invitation, the solution to the data crisis, brought to you by the man Blue Shift tried to destroy. I stood backstage, heart pounding against my ribs as Marcus made the introductions. Ladies and gentlemen, the founder and CEO of Phoenix Data Systems, formerly CloudCrunch, Jameson Hayes. The spotlight hit me as I walked onto the stage. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on the man they'd written off as a delusional failure. I could see Davidson in the front row, his face a mask of practiced indifference that couldn't quite hide his apprehension. "A year ago, I stood in this city with nothing," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "My company destroyed, my reputation in tatters, my innovation stolen. Richard Davidson and Blue Shift made sure of that." Davidson shifted uncomfortably in his seat as murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Today, I'm not here to tell you about the theft. I'm here to show you what happens when you steal something you don't fully understand." For the next 30 minutes, I demonstrated our system's capabilities, showing real-time benchmarks that dwarfed Blue Shift's performance, even before their recent failures. The audience gasped as we processed and compressed data volumes that would have crippled our competitors. "But the real difference isn't just performance," I continued, locking eyes with Davidson. "It's integrity. Phoenix Data Systems is built on honesty and ethical innovation, which brings me to this." The screens behind me filled with internal Blue Shift emails and documentation timestamps. Sarah Chen's evidence, meticulously verified and authenticated by 3 independent digital forensics experts. These documents prove, beyond any doubt, that Blue Shift stole my technology, knew about the critical flaws that led to last week's data corruption, and deliberately concealed those flaws from their clients. Davidson shot to his feet, face flushed with rage. "This is slander. You'll be hearing from our attorneys." I smiled coolly. "Your attorneys have already heard from mine, along with the SEC, the FBI's Cybercrime Division, and the clients whose data you destroyed." I held up the flash drive. "We have everything, Richard. Every email, every meeting, every cover-up." He lunged toward the stage, security barely catching his arms. "You think you've won?" he spat. "We'll bury you. No one beats Blue Shift." I stepped to the edge of the stage, lowering my voice so only those in the front could hear. "You already tried that. Look where we are now." As security escorted him out, screaming threats and obscenities, journalists swarmed forward with questions. The tech world had its scandal of the year, and Phoenix Data Systems had its launch moment. Within 24 hours, our website crashed from the traffic. By the end of the week, we'd signed 5 major clients who'd abandoned Blue Shift. Within a month, their stock had plummeted 47%, and their board had forced Davidson's resignation pending the results of multiple investigations. The call came 6 weeks later. Blue Shift's new CEO, desperate to stop the bleeding, offering to acquire Phoenix for an obscene amount of money. I had him put on speakerphone so the entire team could hear my response. "Thank you for your interest, but Phoenix Data Systems is not for sale. Not to Blue Shift. Not to anyone." 3 years later, I stood on the balcony of our new headquarters, a gleaming tower that stood even taller than Blue Shift's former building, which had recently been sold to cover their legal settlements. Marcus joined me, handing me a champagne flute as we looked out over the city. "Ever regret not taking their offer?" he asked. "You could be on a beach somewhere instead of still working 18-hour days." I shook my head. This was never about money. "Revenge, then?" "Justice," I corrected him, "and building something that matters." Below us, our team, now over 300 strong, gathered for the company photo. Many were former Blue Shift employees who'd jumped ship, including Sarah Chen, now our Chief Technology Officer. We'd just been named one of the most innovative companies in the world, with a corporate culture rating that topped the industry. Davidson had resurfaced recently, launching a podcast about resilience in business that no one listened to. Occasionally, he'd send me messages, sometimes threatening, sometimes pleading for a job, depending on how much he'd had to drink. I never responded. That night, as the celebration wound down, I found myself alone in my office, looking at the framed photo of my old garage apartment, a reminder of where this all began. Next to it sat a small, worn notebook containing the original sketches of the algorithm that had started everything. The lesson wasn't in the revenge, sweet as it had been. It was in the rebuilding, in finding strength in the rubble of destruction, in creating something better from the ashes of what was lost. They had taken everything from me, but in doing so, they had freed me to build something they could never touch, something built on principle, not just profit. The industry titans had laughed at my tiny startup. Now they were scrambling to catch up to my empire. But unlike them, I remembered what it felt like to have nothing but a dream and a determination not to be broken. That memory kept me hungry, kept me honest, kept me human, in a world where success often stripped those qualities away. I closed the notebook, thinking about tomorrow's challenges with a smile. The best revenge wasn't just winning, it was winning with integrity. It was building a legacy that would outlast any fortune. They had tried to write me out of the story, but instead, they had only ensured that my chapter would be the one everyone remembered.